We have heard keynote addresses today, we have heard opening remarks, we have heard panel sessions, we have listened to people speak about some of the issues happening, but it's now time to take it a bit further and have an actual back and forth about some of these issues. And it's my pleasure to announce to you that we are having a panel debate styled event, session really. It's something like nothing you have ever seen before, and it's originally a PFAL design program. The person that will be chairing that debate is someone amazing. He's an education expert, but most importantly, he's also the manager of the program for African leadership at the Feroz Laji Institute for Africa. Please, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, join me to welcome on stage Tosin Adebisi, the chair for the panel debates.
So clearly I'm not biased. I have no preference for any team, as you can tell. I'm working here at PFAL. It's a pleasure to be here to chair our debate. A big welcome to all of you. For those of you who have never been to an inter-university debate here, well, let me just say that it's a friendly debate. It's anything but friendly. We have two teams with us. We have the amazing team from Cambridge who have made the time. Let's make a noise. Now wait here for the PFAL. PFAL, make some noise. Do we still need a debate? I think we have the winner. But jokes aside, big welcome to all of you. The format for the debate is how we normally do it. The debates are usually a precursor to a really robust conversation. We pick topics that are very Afrocentric, and we want young people to be the ones who are at the heart of those conversations. You want to ask why? Well, it's simple. We say future leaders. Well, it's their future today. So it kind of sometimes the future leader part doesn't kind of make a lot of sense, but I know what it means. So what we try to do is to make sure that the topics we pick, we have them share their views, we have their input captured, and we make sure that people who are in leadership positions get to hear that. And that's what we're going to do today. So the topic of today is actually something that we've intentionally picked. We're not trying to be provocative, but we find topics that are relevant, that are contemporary. And it's based on progressive realism. Okay? I will read the topic to you, and I will try and define it really quickly. And I will get a show of hands to see where you stand. And then after the debate, I'll do a show of hands to see if, as we say in Africa, if we're able to persuade you and not confuse you with our debates. And then we do that. So that's the format. So the debate topic is, a policy of progressive realism will finally deliver partnerships of equals in Africa-UK relations. I'm going to read it again. A policy of progressive realism will finally deliver partnerships of equals in Africa-UK relations. The reason why this is particularly important is this is actually the UK foreign new policy. It's going to underpin the UK foreign policy. And we feel like the Africa agency needs to be reflected in this conversation. All right? So we're going to have the team from Cambridge. I'm going to call them. So please make some noise and welcome Joseline and Danji. Come on. So you are going first, Banji. Actually, Joseline on that way, and then Banji. Thank you. Okay. And then the team from LSE, we're going to have our two debaters, Samir. My name is my sister's name. Jesus Christ. My brain is all over the place today. Oh. Oh, yo. I just forgot. Etsy, I call you Katerina. Etsy, Katerina, please. Wow. Come on stage. So we have Etsy Ogene, and Catherine. Catherine will be debating for us, for the proposition. And then we're going to have Samir, who will be debating for us for the proposition for LSE. And then you're going to go first for Cambridge. We give them 4 minutes each. 4 minutes for opening, 4 minutes for closing, and 2 minutes for rebuttal. All right? We have our trusted timekeeper. She's there somewhere. She is ruthless. She doesn't waste any time. Where is Zainab? There, I told you, she's already got the clock out. So without further notice, we're going to kickstart. If there's, okay, Prof is here. So the format will be after the debate. We will then bring our expert panel on. So we're very lucky to have with us Professor Kingsley Moghalu, and we also have Professor Jibril Far. Please give a round of applause for them. Brilliant. So after the debate, we want them to come and help us unpack the conversation.
You said you defined progressive realism?
Oh yeah, we'll do that before. Thank you. Thank you. He can't wait to get started. Hold on. So we're going to bring Dr. Uche Igwe will moderate that conversation. But the idea is that they will now delve into it in a more robust way. And if we can, we'll get you guys to get involved in the conversation. So let's do a definition. So this is what it says. It says, or one of the many definitions, according to David Lamy, progressive realism involves using realist means to achieve progressive ends. This approach seeks to use the logic of realism not merely to accumulate power, but to serve just causes, such as combating climate change, defending democracy, etc., etc. Okay? So if you think that progressive realism is what you think would develop better UK-Africa relations, let's see a show of hands. No? Okay, so not a lot of hands there. I think we already know where this is going, so let's come back at the end of the debate. Okay, so without further ado, Team LSE, over to you.
Progressive realism is a foreign policy framework that balances idealistic commitments, democracy, human rights and development, with practical, interest-driven strategies. In the Africa-UK context, this means moving beyond paternalistic aid models toward mutually beneficial partnerships rooted in economic cooperation, security, and climate action. Instead of relationships that are based on dependence, progressive realism calls for fair trade, value-added industrialization, and economic empowerment. Now we all know that the UK loves to reminisce on its special relationship with Africa. Unfortunately, it was special for the wrong reasons. But we're not here to dwell on the past as our opposition will. We're here to negotiate the future. A true partnership requires that African leaders stand toe-to-toe with the UK, articulating clear demands that serve their citizens' long-term interests. That means no more agreements that read like, we take your resources, you take our well wishes. However, we recognize that corruption is one of the biggest challenges, undermining Africa's ability to negotiate from a position of strength. Yet, looking around this room, we see future African leaders. If we accept the status quo, we risk two outcomes. The first is we close ourselves to foreign partners entirely, or we shift allegiances to countries that exploit us under the guise of development. And let's be honest, we don't want to wake up one day and find out that our entire highway system, our ports, our railways have been collateral for a loan that we didn't know we signed. Yes, history is clear. Africa's relationship with the UK in the 19th and 20th centuries made the continent the labor and resource basket of the world, fueling other people's economic growth, leaving Africa behind. Basically, and I hate to use this with my Nigerian and Ghanaian friends, we did the work, someone else ate the jollof. But times have changed. Africa now holds what the world needs: resources for economic growth and the green transition. The UK, in turn, faces economic stagnation post-Brexit. This presents a strategic opportunity for us as Africans to leverage this moment, to secure equitable trade and investment deals, not ones that reinforce extraction and dependence. We have already seen China step in, securing Africa's resources without improving the livelihoods or fostering long-term prosperity. This is not the model that Africa needs, yet this is the one that is being forced down our throats. They take our lithium, but the least they could do is leave us with some battery factories instead of just taking the minerals and running. This is the moment for Africa to move beyond transactional relationships and towards sustainable, forward-looking partnerships. Africa must negotiate from a position of strength and unity, ensuring that our resources fuel our own development. If Africa embraces progressive realism, we can shape a new, fairer era in Africa-UK relations, one based on mutual benefit, economic empowerment, and shared prosperity. Because at the end of the day, we don't just want a seat at the table. We want to be part of deciding what's on the menu. The time to act is now. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Samir has spoken about something very nice. It's like old wine in a new wineskin. And really we oppose this idea of progressive realism, the idea that it's going to bring any form of equal relationship between the UK and Africa. It doesn't hold water. I read the essay by the Right Honorable Lamy, the current Foreign Minister of the United Kingdom, where he made the case for progressive realism. That essay was 4,058 words. Now, of those 4,058 words, only 58 referred to Africa. 58. And maybe one sentence spoke about the Commonwealth. So it's not really a strategy. It's simply an erasure of the importance of the continent to the UK. Now, if we truly mattered, and when I say we, I mean Africa, if we truly mattered in this whole new UK approach, the needs of Africa would reflect in that policy. And the UK only seeks to want to dictate, say we want to engage, but then when Africa engages with other powers like China, we are told that, like he just said, they're taking our lithium and no batteries. But what he failed to say is about the railroads, the bridges, the stadium, and everything that China has sort of contributed, that you can see hard infrastructure in Africa. And even when we wanted to look at the numbers, we look at, in 2025 alone, just this year, the US has cut about $60 billion in aid. The EU has announced that it's going to cut $2 billion. And the UK, in the budget statement by the Treasury, the Chancellor, they're going to cut about $6 billion by 2027. The same thing goes for Germany, France, and Canada, all cutting in billions. And where's this money going to? It's going into defense and domestic priorities. Now, before you want to have a little bit about Africa, maybe it wasn't making any difference, but at least it's more like a symbolic priority. Even now we've seen that we're not even a symbolic priority. Nobody's even hiding it. Everybody's just cutting funds. And then usually when they cut these funds, we're told about trade and investment. But for a long time, we've also had the EPA, which the UK, when it left Brexit, also had its own form of EPA. That hasn't really delivered any level of industrial transformation that was promised. Africa still maintains the same colonial industrial structures of exporting raw materials and importing finished goods. And I'll give you more numbers. In 2024, Africa paid about $104 or $2 billion in debt service, which is money leaving Africa. And then if we look at like OECD numbers in 2023, we got about $59.7 billion in aid. So there's a deficit. So what you see here, it's not a partnership. It's simply an extraction with a new label. And then also, when you talk about industrial policy, I've just said earlier on, it's just packaged in such a way whereby you keep doing things. So and then also, when it comes to this aid, it's not like it's just being given to you a la carte. There are conditionalities attached to it. There are certain things you have to do to get those aids. And those things sometimes, you might say strengthens the institution in Africa, but if you look at it, it's really weakening the institutions. It's giving control to the NGOs to really dictate to the government what should happen. So there really isn't any agency. And also when it comes to governance, thankfully, the African Union now has a seat on the G20. But, well done. The point is that, I'm sorry I'm going to take a little bit of time. You can take away from the point. But this progressive realism is not effective. It's simply old wine in new skin. And we can't really be partners if we're not at the table. And if we're at the table, we can't set the menu. We're just given the food to eat. Thank you.
Very generous. He doesn't really let me break his time at all. So, Team LSE, you're going to come for your rebuttal. You have for.
Wow. This is a very difficult topic to debate. And I mean, how do you tell a room full of Africans that a relationship with the UK is the way forward when my opponent has so rightly brought about all of our history? He has given us a crash course on colonialism that we maybe have forgotten. And I think one thing that my opponent might have skipped is that progressive realism is not it's not waiting for the UK to give us a seat or give us more than 58 words. Progressive realism is telling the Africans, telling you and I, that we have to be at that, not just be at the table, we have to break down the doors, get into those rooms, get a seat at that table, and make input into what is on the menu. That is the idea of progressive realism. Africa stands as the disadvantaged belle of the ball, desired for our resources but denied our dignity. It's imperative to actually state that the same UK that has proposed progressive realism carted away with over 800 billion pounds in today's value, from the continent during colonialism. Yet progressive realism demands something revolutionary: mutual acknowledgement of this history. This isn't about dwelling in our victimhood, which is what Africa seeks to do if it pulls itself away from opportunities that are provided simply because there was something that happened in history. It's about establishing the truth as the foundation for genuine partnership. Just as the Holocaust is rightfully remembered, so too must colonial extraction be recognized, and progressive realism begins with this historical honesty. We're rejecting aid dependence, just like you said, and that is what progressive realism seeks to do. Progressive realism is tired of getting USAID funded peanuts as a way to be able to fund AIDS and treatments, prevention in our country and on our continent. We must end our addiction to external validation and foreign bailout, and that was so rightfully put by Professor Kingsley Moghalu. Never in history has any country developed through aid dependency. That is true. What matters for Africa is not a form of governance imposed on us by others, but the effectiveness of governance determined by ourselves, which is the opportunity that progressive realism is given to us. That big brother model you have rightfully pointed out, the IMF destruction, the WHO, the World Bank, and all of their aids and stipulations, is what progressive realism seeks to move away from. And you need to understand that this is a beneficial case for both the UK and Africa. We're looking at, if we take a study of the Kenya Green Energy Partnership, Kenya's success came through effective governance, that was focused on economic sovereignty, not through meeting with external governance standards. When UK and Kenya established their green energy partnerships in 2020, they created a model of progressive realism in action. The UK committed £132 million that was matched by Kenyan sovereign funding, equal investment and not charity.
That is progressive realism. The UK-Nigerian security partnership against Boko Haram demonstrated this approach in action, combining British technical support with Nigerian leadership and contextual knowledge to address the root causes of terrorism, not just the symptoms. That is progressive realism. Progressive realism acknowledges Africa's growing geopolitical power. We control 30% of critical minerals that is essential for green technology. Our votes represent 28% of the UN General Assembly. Our diaspora contributes £17 billion annually. What matters is not governance that pleases external powers, but governance that delivers for African citizens. That is progressive realism.
I wasn't cheating.
That's fine. Good. There are lots of critical flaws in the proposition's argument, and I would like to first start with the idea that progressive realism is any different from neocolonialism. What is being suggested is essentially neocolonialism repackaged as a promotion of democracy, an attempt to impose Western systems and values on African nations. We have to stop with the Messiah complex. No more undermining African agencies. The UK does not know what is best for Africa. We have seen first-hand results of such interventions in countries such as Libya and Iraq, where attempts to impose democratic values without any cultural or social context have led to resistance and prolonged conflicts. The fact that a different terminology is being adopted does not make it any ethical or transparent. Better branding does not mean better substance. Just because it's not bad doesn't mean it's not colonialism. Incremental change is not real change unless the root issues are addressed. I have heard you go around about the issue of interest, and I'd like to ask, whose interest are we talking about here? Africa's? Surely not. Because what is being suggested is as an interest that will promote UK's strategic and commercial goals first. And realism to who? Africa? Certainly not. The UK still controls aid, budget cuts, trade policies, and investment priorities. If the system remains exploitative, pragmatism is just another word for passive acceptance. Realism without justice only reinforces the status quo. And how do you reckon these investments through partnerships are going to help Africa grow, when the conditionalities that you impose on African nations practically limit the autonomy of the states? It is antithetical to say to Africans that you support its economic growth, yet you stifle its attempts to take the driver's seat. The answer is not managed dependency. It's economic justice we're asking for. Debt cancellation, fair pricing, tech transfer, and investment without strings. And now there's no EU, so you pivot to Africa. The last that Africa needs is to be caught up in geopolitical rivalries. Africa is still recovering from the effects of the aftermath of the Cold War that wreaked havoc and hindered the stability and development. This time, we won't be used as pawns in the geopolitical game of chess. Its motivation now for pushing this idea of progressive realism is not about partnership. It's about self-preservation, not African development. A dependent partner is more useful to the UK than a powerful one. Trade deals post-Brexit still heavily favor UK exports and interests. If this was about equal partnership, Africa would have a more bargaining power and not just be responding to these arguments. And let's talk about climate change. We have heard that progressive realism is supposed to assist Africa with this climate fight. Can we talk about the fact that Africa is at risk of being hit the hardest by climate change? But let's look at the climate policies. How many of these reflect Africa's interests? Can we talk about the Paris Agreement? Again, we see the West's interests prioritized over Africa's. The realist approach that is being spearheaded basically not only leaves Africa with insufficient support for its economic and developmental needs, but it actively neglects the need to democratize the multilateral institutions that we need to be able to address the issue of climate change in Africa. Progressive politics fundamentally is rooted around up-down. Addressing global inequality is an issue in itself that needs to be addressed at the root cause. If we don't change the structures, we would just be rebranding the status quo. Thank you.
2 minutes. Our opposition has continued to spew this idea that we need to cut ourselves off from the rest of the world. In fact, it's important for us to consider the need to come together with other countries. I don't need to remind this audience that there is a country called the United States of America that is trying very hard to cut itself away from the world. And what is happening? Unemployment, their GDP is going to stagnate, and they're not going to grow. This idea that we're not at the table, that doesn't mean that we can't build a chair ourselves and force ourselves into that room. Africa has strength. It's important. It's time for our leaders to be able to take charge and remind our European partners of that. Opponents may argue that a policy of progressive realism is too idealistic, that historical imbalances or persistent domestic challenges in Africa make an equal relationship unattainable, or that the UK's economic interests simply won't allow true parity. Yet these criticisms completely miss the point. Progressive realism is not a utopian fantasy, but a pragmatic framework that acknowledges our past while charting a new course toward shared prosperity. By balancing idealistic commitments with interest-driven strategies, this approach provides a clear blueprint for transforming Africa-UK relations. It demands that both parties negotiate on equal terms. No more the UK has more power than us, ensuring that Africa's vast potential fuels its own development while the UK benefits from genuine, sustainable economic partnerships. A policy of progressive realism is precisely what is needed to break the cycle of paternalism, dependency, and exploitation that has existed since time immemorial. It will finally deliver a partnership of equals that not only rectifies historical injustices, but also paves the way for mutual growth and lasting stability. We must embody Ubuntu. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Thank you.
The team from LSE did not speak about reparations. They didn't speak about the cost of development and the cost of finance. In a previous panel, we spoke about the exaggeration of the risk in Africa that allows financing to be difficult. You see, these things are important factors in achieving economic transformation that can allow for economic growth, that would allow for the real independence, that would allow for the real parity. You see, we don't have the needed capital. We don't have the structures. And now you want us to come and talk in some sort of way because you're no longer a global power, but we want you to be realistic about what we can do for you. What about what you did that got us to this point? That's not being discussed. This policy, as I've said, it's 4,000 words. 58 words was about Africa. Africa, to this government, to this administration, to the West, is a footnote. And that is clear. The facts reflect that, the words reflect that, and I suppose the actions also reflect that. Thank you.
Okay. So you want the pull up show of hands? What do you think? Have you been swayed? Progressively? Yes?
Sir, comment. I think the you guys actually were speaking a little bit about the same, but we're just lost in the terminology.
Yes. I mean, just a on that point, one of the reasons why PFAL debates are so powerful, the key part of the program, is we always encourage that if you can debate something you don't believe in, it makes you much more stronger to believe in what you actually stand for and actually validate it or actually change your mind. Debating opposition is not easy. So I'm not picking for my students, but they got the opposition, you know, and we kind of, there's really leaning in this debate. So, but it doesn't matter. Big round of applause for the debate. So, as this debate friendly, we're not taking any winners. Everybody is a winner. You get a car, you get a car. So, but if you want to see how it really goes down in a proper debate, come to the first national debate that we'll be having later this year. We should be having about 8 universities on that very first one. So watch this space. So thank you so much. Everybody give a round of applause. Thank you. So, yes, we're going to now move into our expert panel. I'm going to call Dr. Uche Igwe. Please come up.
Please, can you give this panel of very exciting students a resounding round of applause? And I want to say that they've made my job very easy. So let me respectfully invite very, very tested erudite practitioners who will give us the expert perspectives. Professor Jibril Fal, visiting fellow, visiting professor, Philos Large Institute for Africa, and very quickly, the president of Africa School of Governance, a respected brother and friend, Professor Kingsley Moore, please. A resounding round of applause. Progressive realism. Realistic means of pursuing progressive ends. And a lot of words came to my mind as the conversations were going on. Honesty, reciprocity, balance of power, effective governance, trust. And I want you to take it first, Professor Moalo, as someone who has been everywhere, the continent, been around diplomatic issues for a long time. I am also sure that in your new role, you are not a stranger to these concepts flying around. What do you think, as a leader who has spent so much time on this space, how realistic is this partnership looking, especially if you look at the current situation in the continent?
Thank you. First of all, I just want to congratulate the students on a fantastic performance all around. Especially the ability to debate what you don't believe in is really awesome, and that is to be respected. Second thing I would say, progressive realism, nice try. Nice try. I've been around the block. I've been a UN diplomat, a UN official for 17 years. Served in Cambodia, served in New York, served in Croatia, served in Tanzania, served in Switzerland, and left. Why did I leave? did my doctorate at LSE. And the scales fell off my eyes when my supervisor, Peter Wilson, I hope he still teaches here, the International Relations Department, introduced me to the English School Theory of International Relations. And when I read The Anarchical Society, A Study of Order in World Politics by Hedley Bull, I was like, oh my God. Nice career, but it's time to move on to something else. And I left. The world is, and we see it playing out in what President Trump is doing. The struggle between populism in domestic economies and domestic political constituencies and what people expect internationally at the international level. The world is divided into 3 epochs. The classic one from the Peace of Westphalia is what we call the international system. In the international system, the states are sovereign, completely in control of their own affairs. They relate to each other through envoys, through trade, and by occasional war and warfare. When the Universal Postal Union was set up in the 1880s, technology, the Morse code, had now been invented. The world started shrinking. And, distances were cut short. Globalization actually began in that era. The rise of international organizations where states could come together to collaborate, collaborate over certain shared values while jostling for advantage at the same time and while pursuing their national interests, was described by Hedley Bull as the international society. So we've shifted from a system to a society. In that society, we all belong to the UN, we all belong to the European Union, we all belong to this and that. And states speak the language of aspiration, but act to advance domestic interests, strategic national interests. And to whom do you owe your first priority? Your people, your country, your territorial state, the people who elected you, the people who pay taxes. That has not changed, and it's not going to change anytime soon. How was this proven? By the third phase, the third epoch, which rose, created a lot of hopes that have now been thoroughly shattered. First of all, COVID came. And African countries were expecting the world to come and save them. The world said, the vaccines are for our people first. Sorry. When we finish with them, we'll send the remainder to you. So the Africans were like, oh my God. We thought we were an international community. Yeah. So Africa now moved to manufacturing, setting up their own manufacturing. So what's the point I am trying to make? That progressive realism is a very good attempt, at improvement in terms of equity in relationships between Britain and the developing world. But like someone said, if you have not changed the structures, you cannot change the status quo. And Africa, speaking for Africa, the only person who has the responsibility and the only person who can reset international relations between Africa and Britain, or between Africa and any great power, is Africans themselves. Nobody's ever come to do it for you. The Asians have reset the international society structure. The West didn't do it for them. The Asians did it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I hate to disrupt you, and
No, it's fine.
I mean, it was sounding very sonorous to my ears, and but I had to disrupt you, Prof.
I know.
Professor Jubril, I just want you to have a take on the Chinese interest in Africa, the Chinese relationship. I mean, there's sort of similarity in what we hear. We hear about win-win, and I sort of overheard in the preliminaries around progressive realism, I've overheard win-win. Do you think this is copying China or responding to the Chinese pressure? Or are we caught up as a continent, as a pawn in the chess game of global geopolitics and competition about powers and big powers?
So we thought we were discussing a contemporary issue, which is the foreign policy from our dear brother, the Right Honorable David Lammy, who comes from what used to be the People's Republic of Tottenham. But the professor takes us to 1648, Treaty of Westphalia. Elizabeth I dies 1603, and she's succeeded by her cousin, James VI of Scotland, who united the crowns and became James I. And a year later, he sent a politician as an envoy, again to Germany, to what is now Germany, to Ostberg in Bavaria. And that gentleman was Sir Henry Wotton. And Henry Wotton famously said that an ambassador is an honest gentleman sent abroad to lie for the good of his country. That broadly remains the same. Our foreign secretary is the chief ambassador, is the chief diplomat. So from the very inception of diplomacy, it is transactional and self-interest, as it were. But in British diplomacy and foreign policy, there's other characteristics. There's that core. There's two, in my observation, two remarkable elements to it. They also, it's the Foreign Office that gave the world the phrase going native. You've heard of that. The origins of it was, the Foreign Office was always worried about sending diplomats to a place for long periods of time. That's why it is still tradition, except for few countries in the world, that when you go on a diplomatic posting, there's a limit, 3 years, 5 years. There's exceptions to that, and one curious exception is Cameroon, where they would send you for 14 years, long periods of time. And the fear is that you may go native. You go, you get to know the people, you like the people, you begin to side with the people. So that's why they didn't like people going native. And to this day, they are recalled in good time. There's another element to British foreign policy that it is most eminently polite. It is only Britain or British diplomacy that would most politely invite you to desist, or unfortunately, they may have to kill you. I'm sorry, but I'll have to kill you. So you have to have these dimensions, and the use of words and politeness matters. So if you then come back, so I took you, 44 years before, 1604, that's when Wotton went to Ostberg. You come back, the use of language in this primary matter of self-interest matters. Progressives in English politics is about those who want social reform. as opposed to the traditionalists who want to keep the status quo. So within the Labour Party, and the Right Honourable is from the Labour Party, that's like the good part of diplomacy and politics that is moved forward. It is betrayed by this realism. So if one was to then say, okay, it's progressive, we want change, but it's as if you were saying, we want change, but as St. Augustine famously said, you know St. Augustine, by the way, who's an African, is from Carthage, Tunisia, and he's the one who gave us theology as we know it. He said, God, save me from temptation, but not yet. Allow me to sin. So effectively, the progressive, so let's go for this good thing, but realism. And I think that reduction is so true. And it's illustrated, the ODA has been cut. We may all have views as to whether aid is good, all of that. But you have a promise. The government, when doing it, believes that it's good. The British government giving aid to developing countries, including Africa, believe they are doing a good thing. So on their own terms, it's a good thing. Now you cut it, that means you are reducing the good you do. And to cut it so savagely and so abruptly means that this realism bit is an Augustinian prayer. I mean good, but not yet.
Thank you, Prof. You seem to direct us to begin to think indigenously. Looking into Africa, reciprocity appeared to be part of us. Even those days of the colonial masters, reciprocity is part of us. Do you think that there are policies, programs? I mean, I hear about the NEPAD, for instance, that sort of is already doing what is being prescribed, that could be amplified. And that's one side of the question. Another side of the question, again, trying to be optimistic, is that in all of these, are there low-hanging fruits for whatever is what to take away from progressive realism at this time in the evolution of Africa-UK relations?
Yeah. What I would say is that Africans have to understand that you cannot develop domestically to rise to the level of industrialized countries like Britain or even the new powers in Asia if you do not have a fundamental philosophical foundation. If you don't have a worldview driving you with some ambition about how you see the world, how you interpret the world, your relationship with the world and where you're going in the world, how to get there, and the value system that will guide your society. This is the foundation. Discussing relations with great powers without this foundation, for me, speaks a little bit of naivety. This is the mistake that the rising Asian powers did not make, even though that they also were subject to colonialism. But they were not subjected to the transatlantic slave trade the way the Africans were. So Africa needs to go to the roots of its challenges and sort itself out in its own internal space. What matters for African countries is whether you can provide potable drinking water, whether you have electricity, whether the woman who is pregnant has access to health care for her and her children, and whether you are trading in value-added products. That's what matters first before your relationship with the United Kingdom. Why is this the case? Because once you sort out these matters, nobody will be telling you about progressive realism. The transactions and the relationships will actually be established in reality as equals. It's not going to be established by a speech. Britain and the West deal with China as equals. They don't coin theories about progressive realism with China or Singapore or Malaysia. Those things, that language, that discourse does not exist because those countries have changed reality. Once the reality is changed on the ground, the other interlocutors will respect the reality on the ground. You are equal because you have done what equals do.
Thank you very much. Professor Jibril, there are those who suggest that Great Britain, especially after the exit from the European Union, has been less and less powerful. And again, those persons insist that this new strategy to re-engage could be another way to regain influence in coping with the consequences of Brexit. As someone who has given us a very robust historical approach to these issues, what are your thoughts on this?
I don't believe so, because I don't think this Labour government or British people really have any aspirations of claiming the grandeur that had gone. You remember sort of in the days of empire, the map of the world used to be color-coded. So the pink color was the British colonies, and the atlas, the map, was pink. I don't know whether you heard the famous Desmond Tutu joke about that, but it was true that the sun never set on the British Empire, because at every given time there's a piece of land on this earth that had daylight, and it was owned by the Brits. According to Desmond Tutu, that is true, because God does not trust the British with night. Look at what they do during the day. Now, that for a small country, for a small piece of land off the continent of Europe, to have that massive power, that massive influence is most remarkable. And everybody knows that's not going to happen again soon. And I don't think there's any Brits who really think that's happening. So this is almost crisis management period. In fact, this realism bit is, in my view, undermining that influence, because this policy is succeeding. The last time we had a foreign policy around this was Global Britain by Boris Johnson. Global Britain, that's what we had. And even then, the aspirations are betrayed by the lack of real action. So some of the soft power is being lost, and almost every African country can read through the lines as to what's happening, because the engagement is going down. We don't know the bonfire of different programs. We don't know how big it would be. So in my view, that's actually very sort of short-sighted for the government. There is, and there was hope that with this new Labour government, there would be a concept of more globalism and more international. Prof, in your description of the different phases, the last phase, there was a period of idealism in the world.
Yes.
When you had the contentions of East and West, and then those who were so-called pro-democracy, it was ideological to really engage on what you had in the West. And I think we are beginning to see, unfortunately for Africa, we're beginning to fall into that trap again. You have the so-called AES in the Sahel, the Association of Sahel Countries, who are now going to Russia. as a counter to what they are losing. It's just so painful, in my view, that we are going back to this. Same thing with our relationship with Britain. I don't think every African country should feel very sorry, because as you rightly said, we've all learned that although we have a low bargaining power and a small hand, not a strong one, it does not mean that those who are weak cannot be strong, because there are significant stories, and the China story, of course, is the best story ever, in that now they are the period of competing for that dominance, where all you have to go is 30 years ago. Within a generation, it was a developing country that would plead for aid, as it were.
Thank you.
So I don't think that that's the case.
Thank you very much, Professor Moralu. Just a quick one before we come to the ranking.
Oh, yeah. Okay, very good. I was just going to say, in addition to what Professor PFAL said, that we should understand something. And that is that all great powers are in the same business. They're in the business of their strategic national interests. The only way, when we used to talk a lot about, I didn't have time to finish on the third epoch, which was the epoch of the international community, but the truth always was that the international community was an illusion created to absorb the unsuspecting and pretend that we're all one, whereas the real great powers were using that facade to advance their own interest. And that is the construct on which foreign aid was built, which now is imploding from the most unlikely source, but not for a reason that is to help Africa. It is for more domestic reasons in the United States, but Africans can take advantage. So all great powers are in the same business, and that is to advance their national interest. The international community had the real powers who were at the table, and all other, the lesser powers or the lesser countries were on the menu. That's what was going on, and they were being had for lunch. In the name of the international community. So the point is that the AES, to which Professor PFAL refers, is an interesting experiment that we should watch. But if they anchor their hope on Russia, they will go nowhere. If they want to be truly autochthonous, if they want to be truly internally driven, they have hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that I have learned a lot. I have really learned a lot. Can you give these erudite, knowledgeable, historical experts a befitting round of applause, please? But before we close, I would like to have one or two. Okay, my bosses have said, yes, one or two questions from the audience, because I think that this debate has to be complete. I know that your minds are all agitated, so we'll take very few, and then maybe one last parting shot from the panel, and then we'll close. Please, yes. The mic. Cathedral voice, please go ahead.
My name is Elvis Oxford. One thing we've discovered
For the recording.
in world history, empires rise and fall, from the Roman to the Byzantine to the American polar system that is now shifting to a multipolar now. One thing remains constant, and that is the fact is that Africa keep being the raw material supplier to the world. Yes, we've not been able to, key into the added value system. Now, Prof, made mention that the international or the international interventions, those free aids was a facade that the international system was built on. I tend to think that while that is true, why not we start thinking about the system of governance that is democracy? Do you think it's part of what is holding us back because they gave it to us? It's not a locally invented system of governance.
Thank you. Can we have another person? No, there's a lady. Say again. Which one? No, but there's a lady here too. So you're close to the lady at the back. Take her, but there's another lady here. Okay, upstairs. So let's take. Go ahead, please.
Hi.
You have a cathedral voice.
Hi. I just like the fact that Mr. Fall brought the topic of the issue going on with the Sahel state, that being Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso withdrawing from ECOWAS, because it seems to be kind of sort of a new revolution regarding Africa's future, because whether we like it or not, they're very impactful countries, whether that being for their raw materials, resources, etc. In particular, I wanted to mention the President Ibrahim Traore, which has been making views in the African community for the past months, or I would say 2 years, and France specifically, relating to their colonialism and past relationships. I just wanted to have you guys' views and see what you generally think regarding this shift that seems to be taken, because from what I've seen, he's not only saying words, but he's seeming to take action regarding Africans' future when it comes to Pan-Africanism, and maybe what consequences might bring us well in the near future that we may not be able to see right now.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to, my name is Donu, and what I wanted to ask you in relation to...
Microphone.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my name's Donu, I'm a journalist, and I want to ask the two profs, what does failure look like within the context of the Sahel attachment to Russia? If you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What's the worst that can happen? Because I agree with you, I think it's a really bad idea. But how bad could it be, and how quickly could it get that bad?
Okay. Yes. Up. No. The gentleman in front there.
Thank you. I'm the South African guy again. On the question of the philosophical foundation that you spoke about, I think post-independence and throughout the process of gaining independence, there was a lot of thinkers and leaders who had thought very critically about that foundation, be it Fanon, Nkrumah, Steve Biko, and in some sense there was an attempt to develop this.
Yeah.
What do you think in the modern day is missing then from this attempt to create this foundation, and what do you think is a philosophical foundation we can use going into the future, integrating ideas from the past?
Thank you. Yes, I think that.
So we don't start forgetting the questions.
Yes. The two profs. Maybe you should go first, Professor Jibril. 2 minutes.
I apologize that I won't be able to answer directly to the question, so I'm just reflecting based on the questions I've heard. And by the way, I'm sorry I mentioned AES because that opens up a whole thing. So, Flair, you need to convene another session just to deal with the Sahelian state. But I think taking it from the last point, sort of what is the conceptual approach to really Africa to get this sort of higher bargaining power it would need vis-a-vis UK or Russia or any other thing. I strongly believe a significant part of it is still not only its people in the country, but its diaspora. Because some of the biggest wins that Africa have seen have involved its diaspora. You mentioned Fanon, you mentioned Nkrumah, you mentioned all of them. They were diaspora. Either the older diaspora or a new diaspora, and the diaspora contributed immensely to not only Pan-Africanism, the conceptualization of, and then leading to decolonization, which at least having political independence was a major success on that basis. And again, if you come back to the UK-Africa relationship on aid, in fact, the amount of aid, pound for pound, in relation to what the diaspora contributes is very small. So African remittances, this is formally counted remittances, is 100 billion to Africa. Nigeria takes a big chunk of it, about 20 or more. But the last time I did a big study on this is about 5 years ago. And even then I was counting it as at least 200 billion. That is, if you count informal remittances and remittances in kind, 200 billion. So that dwarfs all of this money. So we may have no choice but to take the cuts as a sort of opportunity to, as the panel earlier that Prof was on, to use these innovations and create new partnerships with the UK and other partners on the basis of investment, business, and the products and services we have.
Thank you very much. Professor Marwan, your last shot on this.
Okay. Let me, first of all, respond to the question on democracy, because it's very contemporary. There's no question that democracy, Western liberal democracy, is having a very hard time in Africa for two reasons. The first is that very few African countries practice it the way it ought to be practiced. The second is that it hasn't led to economic transformation on the continent. So for these two reasons, the legitimacy of democracy as an idea of governance is now being challenged. 30 years ago, the United States was telling African dictators, if you don't move to democracy, we will not give you aid, we will not give you support. Today, the very idea of democracy is being challenged in the United States. And I think this tells us as Africans that we need to think for ourselves a lot more and stop relying on received wisdom from anywhere. Let me buttress this a little bit. I don't want to entertain you a lot, but I want to tell you that I once ran for president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. In 2019. My daughter Chidera is here.
She's hiding her.
She was very skeptical. But I was full of zeal and passion for my country. And I wanted to show how our country should be governed to become great. And I ran a campaign that was very, very, I don't want to be modest, but it was impactful because everybody in the country saw me. Many people liked what I was saying and liked me, but they would tell me, you know, you're so brilliant, but all the other candidates, they're sharing money. And you're speaking English.
Grammar,
as they call it. You're speaking grammar. But your competitors are distributing money. Now, when you have a domain in which this is playing out, is this a democracy or not? For a democracy to be real, you've got to have an educated populace. You've got to have a populace that understands what the issues are that are in contention and in debate, and then they choose a side. So where you have populations that are not literate, mainly, and then they are poor. And when they're poor and value systems have been eroded, they are now susceptible for their votes to be bought. So, therefore, with very few exceptions in Africa, maybe Botswana, maybe even South Africa, Mauritius, even Senegal and Ghana, where Western liberal style democracy has continued to, march on. And that's admirable. So my point on democracy before I leave is, if you want to use that Western system of democracy, stick to it, but do it well. Do it the right way. Don't do it the way it's being done in some countries that I will not mention, which are essentially plutocracies and enocracies. They're not real democracies. Some powerful people gather all the money and buy the votes and just decide what happens. So that's not a democracy. So that's the point. And Africa has to look within itself, because identity is development. Identity is development. Remember, without making any judgment, the fact of the matter is that most of Asia that has become an economic giant zone, they were not democracies. They did not achieve those things using the Western democratic. So the point is that all societies have a right to choose how they want to be governed. I'm not supporting dictatorships or anything, so I don't want to be misquoted. But we should look into our own cultures in Africa. There are ways that our societies have organized themselves, and we can bring more of that. At the African School of Governance, where I'm the president, we are going to have a center for homegrown innovations in governance across Africa, where we're going to resuscitate African cultures, African worldviews as a part of governance. We will do case studies and we'll share it to the world.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think this debate has been everything and more. Deep, exhaustive, historical, even entertaining. So I want you to join me in thanking these two erudite professors for doing beyond justice to this topic. Please, can you give us? And I thank all of you for contributing and listening to us. I want to respectfully sign off. And please, can you also give me a round of applause?
Thank you so very much, Dr. Uche. I think that was very brilliant. You have used up all the words I would have used. I may have to come for extra lessons, but that was very well done. Thank you so much. Let's give them all together, the debaters, our panelists, Dr. Uche, another round of applause. And thank you, Professor Kingsley Mohalo, and also Prof. also for your insights. Let me mention that the very first time I met you was in 2019 when you were running for president, and you walked into Splash FM in Ibadan, Oyo State. We held an interview with you, and afterwards, people were like, very great guy, fantastic ideas, but we are not sure where that's going. All right, then, yes, you can make your way down. Let's appreciate them as they make their way down once again. Thank you all, thank you all, thank you all.